Prism and Bowman Chrome, kind of two sets that are very, not necessarily similar, but like two of the biggest brands for the company themselves. The Anthony Richardson sells for $7K, which is wild. And then Brady Zappi sells for $8K. I don't know who is buying that card. Like this card, maybe, because I potentially could see if he sneaks up and he becomes the #1 pick, I could see that going up in price. That could be a quick flip. Or if, I don't know, if he becomes a superstar in the league, I don't necessarily know what you'd have to price the card at for it to be worth what you paid, like worth the 7,000. Like, I don't necessarily know where the price of the card has to be, unfortunately, for it to be considered like a good buy or an investment, I guess, if you were investing. Brady Zappi, the 1/1 selling for 8,000. That's the type of card where I look at that and I say, I think that was probably shilled, like, and realistically, like, I just don't see how anybody could look at Brady Zappi. And sure, he played 2 games and he played well, but like, he doesn't really have, I think that he could be a draft day trade potentially to a team that needs a quarterback, because he showed, I think, that he can play in the 2 games that he played, which is definitely a small sample size. So yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily like where the trajectory is for Brady Zappi to get into the league. I think Mac Jones showed that he's a better quarterback. I think at the beginning of the football season last year, there was kind of some concerns with Mac Jones. But I think that they brought back Bill O'Brien. They got out Matt Patricia, who, like, many people probably don't know who those people are, but like, Matt Patricia was the defensive coordinator for the Patriots, and then he became the offensive coordinator. And then Mac Jones had his worst season probably as a professional, to be completely honest, which I think that's only his 2nd season. So I guess it's, again, another sort of a small sample size. But then now they brought back Bill O'Brien, who was actually the offensive coordinator at Alabama when Mac Jones was playing there. So I think that's going to help Mac Jones for sure. But then it's not going to help Brady Zappi. So I don't know where this 8,000 coming is. Like, I don't know why the 8,000 ends up happening there. Like, I get it's a 1/1, but at the same time, like, it just doesn't make sense why someone's spending $8,000 on a 1/1 Brady Zappi, especially when out of Prism, there's like a bunch of 1/1s. It's not a graded card. Like, I think this is I don't even know necessarily if this is like the refractor 1/1. Like, cause like I said, there's so many 1/1s that are coming out of Prism that, like, I don't know. The 8,000 doesn't make much sense to me. The 7,000, I guess, does make sense for this card for Richardson, because he has grown his prospect status over the past like year. Like, he was the Florida quarterback, obviously. Florida didn't have the best season, but I would say of the players on that team, of the Florida team, I watch a lot of Florida games because I'm a Gators fan. So like, that's maybe why I don't know if I'm biased, but like with Anthony Richardson, I think he was pretty good last year, to be completely honest. Was he better than Shroud and Bryce Young? I don't know necessarily. I mean, it's interesting around draft time. You definitely see reporters coming out with stories about players, and I think this is a decent example. You see reporters coming out with stories that are trying to increase this draft stock of certain players. I think this is a perfect example. Like, I think that he definitely got into a top 10 pick conversation. I saw a lot of reports that he was going to be #1, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Like, I think Bryce Young and CJ Stroud will probably go 1 and 2 for quarterbacks. There's also Will Lewis, I think, is coming out of Kentucky. He was another kind of high draft pick. But you will see reporters come out with articles about, for example, like an Anthony Richardson saying that he should be the #1 pick. I think that those are more planted stories for teams that are maybe trying to make some moves around the draft. Like, maybe teams that need a quarterback, or maybe teams that don't need a quarterback are trying to get some more prospects that they're looking for. Like, maybe if CJ Stroud and Bryce Young go 1 and 2, like, maybe there's a team at 3, 4, or 5 that is going to select a player that teams 6, 7, or 8 maybe wants. So if they can get Anthony Richardson to get drafted in that 3 or 4, they then can get that player to drop down some of the draft boards, because it's a business when it comes down to it. So it's like, it's maybe a team trying to do a little bit of business here and trying to get Anthony Richardson up so that way they can get the guy that they want without having to trade up. So, you know, I think he's definitely jumped up draft boards pretty significantly since the beginning of the offseason for Florida. So the 7,200, like if you know, if a miracle happens and he gets drafted #1 overall, I think that you could maybe see this sell for 10K. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was someone's strategy buying this card at 7,000. If there were multiple people that wanted this card, that could have been another reason why this jumped up. Like, if it's a $5,000 card, that wouldn't have surprised me either. But the Brady Zappi card being 8K, I'd say that's probably a similar play where the person that's buying it is expecting Brady Zappi to be like traded and then named a starter. And then, you know, again, maybe selling the card for 10 to 11K when the news comes in that Brady Zappi is going to be a starter somewhere. I can't imagine that there's a Brady Zappi fan that's just out here buying cards for $8,000. Like, just buy one of his regular cards. Like, so I would say these types of cards are probably bought in preparation for the draft. Like, so I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see like some quarterback cards or players that could be traded. We could potentially see some of those cards see a little bit of a bump. I mean, we did see like last year, I think it was either last year or 2 years ago with like AJ Brown. He was a player that was traded on draft. He was a player that was traded on draft day, whether you think that he should have been traded. I mean, he just played in the Super Bowl. I think, you know, we saw there was like a viral video of the trade being announced and Mike Vrabel, the coach of the Titans, being like super angry at the GM, which I can clearly see why, because it's like, why would you trade a top 5 wide receiver for draft picks? I mean, this is sort of the conversation that I've talked about with quarterbacks and with draft capital. Like, I would rather, if I were a GM and I'm not, I would rather have the player versus the picks. So like for the Eagles, they're obviously looking at it and saying, that's exactly what we want. We want AJ Brown because best case scenario, we draft a wide receiver and in 3 years, he is AJ Brown. Or we can just go out and get AJ Brown right now. And maybe that's where, like, even with Brady Zappi, like, for example, he did break the record for most touchdowns thrown in the NCAA in his last year before he was drafted, which is why I loved when the Patriots drafted him. I think, does he unfortunately maybe end up just being a backup? Like, I don't know. With the Patriots quarterback situation, it's always kind of interesting. Like, you never know. You never really know what Belichick is doing. And I think that is maybe a scenario here with Brady Zappi. Like, that's why this may be more dangerous than, like, buying somebody else. Like, if you were buying Stidham, or you were buying Jimmy G when they were backups, you know, Jimmy G panned out a little bit. Stidham, maybe not as much. I mean, he sort of had a little bit of redemption, a little kind of moving around. I think he signed with the Broncos, which means he's still going to be the backup behind Russell Wilson. But like with Patriots quarterbacks, if it wasn't Tom Brady, it was really just a wild card. Like, you didn't know what was going to happen. And I think we're kind of in the same boat with Mac Jones here, with Brady Zappi being the backup and Mac Jones being the starter. We don't really know what's going to happen to Brady Zappi. If he gets traded, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets traded for like a 3rd or 2nd round pick. No, probably like a 3rd or 4th. I think he was drafted in the 6th or 7th. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets traded for like a 3rd or a 4th. Cause like with Rodgers, I think it was like when he was thinking about getting traded, there was like rumors it would be a 2nd. So I don't know what that means for Brady Zappi or Bailey Zappi. I keep calling him Brady. Bailey Zappi, like, where he showed some potential, but like, is he a quarterback that, you know, is a starter in the league? Maybe. I don't know, but I just don't think there's been enough time for him in the league to really. I don't think he's the perfect example of a quarterback who has potential, but like hasn't shown really that he can be a starter. But I don't know. Somebody spent $8,000 on his card, so I don't necessarily think it's warranted. I think the $7,000 spent on the Anthony Richards makes a little bit more sense because it is a 1-of-1 superfractor with an autograph. The Bailey Zappi isn't an autograph. But I don't know, probably more than I would suggest paying for either of these two cards. But with the draft coming up, I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with these quarterbacks, if there's any trades, where people get drafted in this year's draft for sure.